All of you very good morning students. Today topic lymph. The previous class discussed the red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. So today discuss the lymph. So the lymph is a part of the blood, the fluid connective tissue. Lymph is a part of the blood. So the discuss the fluid connective tissue. That fluid connective tissue, plasma, platelets, and the lymph. So complete the plasma and platelets, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So they are the formed elements. So they are the completed. Today discuss the lymph. First one, the lymph. Lymph is a colorless fluid. Lymph is a colorless fluid. The lymph is a colorless fluid. The lymph is a colorless fluid. Next one, it lacks means absent. It lacks red blood cells, platelets, red blood cells, platelets, and a large plasma proteins. So it absent red blood cells, platelets, large plasma proteins. It contain white blood cells. White blood cells also called leukocytes. It contain white blood cells and it contain white blood cells and small plasma proteins. Small plasma proteins. Next one, so it contains a white blood cells and small plasma proteins. It is absent of the red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Next one, it was formed in the interstitial space. It was formed in the location interstitial space. It was formed by the interstitial space. They are formed by the interstitial space. Next one, lymph contain formed by plasma and lymphocytes. So the lymph contain a plasma. Lymph is formed by the plasma and lymphocytes. Lymphocytes means, so they are the lymph cells, plasma and lymphocytes. Next one, comparing to the tissue fluid. Comparing to the tissue fluid, it contains less amount of oxygen and nutrients. Comparing to the tissue fluid, it less amount of the oxygen and nutrients and more amount of carbon dioxide and metabolites. More amount of the carbon dioxide and metabolites. So they are presenting on the lymph. Once revise, lymph is a colorless fluid. Like these are the liquid. Next one, it absent in the red blood cells, platelets, and large plasma proteins. Red blood cells, platelets, and large plasma proteins are the absent. But it contains leukocytes. Leukocytes means these are the white blood cells. Leukocytes and small plasma proteins. It contains the leukocytes and small plasma proteins. So it was formed by the lymph is formed by the interstitial space of the tissues. It was formed by the interstitial space of the tissues. Next one, the tissue fluid, the comparing to the tissue fluid, the lymph fluid is comparing to the tissue fluid, the less amount of the oxygen and nutrients, less amount of the oxygen and nutrients, and more amount of the carbon dioxide and metabolites, more amount of the carbon dioxide and metabolites. For example, so these are the one tissue, so these are the one tissue. So these are the tissue. So the tissues contain a cells. The cells. So the tissues contain a cells. First of all, so they are the blood arterioles. So they are the blood arterioles. So blood arterioles are the transport of the oxygenated blood. The arterioles are the transported to the oxygenated blood. So they are the oxygenated blood. So the oxygenated blood coming from the arterioles to arteriolar capillaries. So they are the capillaries, arteriolar capillaries. So in this arterial capillaries, so they are the blood hydrostatic pressure. The blood hydrostatic pressure, these fluid going to the tissue fluid. So they are entering from the tissue fluids. So they are the moving from the capillaries to spaces. So they are the tissue spaces. So they are the moving from the tissues. So depending on the hydrostatic pressure, so the maintain the hydrostatic pressure, the blood is moving from the, that fluid is moving from the tissue space. These are called the extracellular fluid, ECF, extracellular fluid. So the blood is coming from the arterioles to arteriolar capillaries. In this arteriolar capillaries, the fluid is moved to the tissue fluids. So in this fluids contain nutrients, gases. So the cells are the utilize the nutrition and gases. Next one, the more amount, like 85%, the flowing fluid is called the extracellular fluid. That extracellular fluid 85%. So they are coming from the 100%. The 100% the filter from the moving from the tissue fluid space, the tissue fluids. So they are called the extracellular fluid. That fluid is called the extracellular fluid. That extracellular fluid, more amount, like 85% of fluid, they are going from the venular capillaries. So these are the venules. The venules present on the venular capillaries. These 85% of the fluid, extracellular fluid, 85% of extracellular fluid going from the venular capillaries through the osmotic pressure. So in the hydrostatic pressure, they are coming from the capillaries to interstitial space. In osmotic pressure, the 85% of fluid going from the venular capillaries. So they are the deoxygenated blood. Remaining 15% of fluid, small amount of the fluid, these are entering from the lymph capillaries. 15% of the fluid entering from the lymph capillaries. 15% of the fluid entering from the lymph capillaries. That lymph capillaries is combined to form the lymph vessels. Lymph vessels combined to form the lymph duct. Once that fluid entering from the lymph capillaries, lymph vessels, lymph ducts. Once fluid entering from the lymph capillaries or lymph ducts or lymph vessels, so these are called the lymph. So they are the lymphatic system. Once revised, so these are the tissues. That tissues receiving from the oxygenated blood like fluid. So they are coming from the arteriole to arteriolar capillaries. That capillaries, that blood is moving from the tissue space. So this fluid is called the extracellular fluid. So the extracellular fluid, 85% of the extracellular fluid is moving from the venular capillaries to venules. Remaining small amount, that 15% of the fluid, that fluid entering from the lymph capillaries. 15% of the fluid entering from the lymph capillaries to lymph vessels to lymph ducts. Once that fluid entering from the lymph capillaries or lymph vessels or lymph duct, so these are called the lymph. So the lymphatic system is also called the accessory root of the lymphatic system. So they are formed by the interstitial space of the tissues. Once the fluid entering from the lymph capillaries or lymph vessels or lymph ducts, so these are called the lymph. So these are the lymphatic system. So the lymph is a colorless fluid. It absent of the red blood cells, platelets, large plasma proteins, but it contains white blood cells, means leukocytes and small plasma proteins. Next one, so they are formed by the interstitial space of the tissues. It is formed by the interstitial space of the tissues. Next one, the comparing to the tissue fluid, the lymph system is comparing to the tissue fluid. So they are the small amount of the oxygen and small amount of the nutrients. They are more amount of the carbon dioxide and metabolites. So once the arteriolar capillaries, they coming from the fluid, that fluid entering from the tissue space, these are called the extracellular fluid. That extracellular fluid, more amount, in 85% of the fluid going from the venular capillaries, that venular capillaries to venules. So the formed by the remaining 15% of the fluid entering from the lymph capillaries to lymph vessels to lymph ducts, that lymph ducts is connecting from the jugular veins. The lymph ducts is connecting to the left jugular vein, right jugular vein. So they are presenting on this region is the left jugular vein, so they are the right jugular vein. In this jugular veins is a opening from the blood circulatory systems, the blood venular systems. So they are going from the heart to, they are mixing with the blood. Next, the blood going from the tissues. The tissues are separate from the lymph. Lymph is connected coming from the lymph vessels, lymph ducts, lymph capillaries, lymph vessels, lymph ducts. Next one, that lymph ducts is connected from the jugular veins. That jugular vein, the lymph is going from the deoxygenated blood. That deoxygenated blood going from the heart. They are transported to the different types of the body parts. So these are the lymphatic system, lymph. So they are the 4 marks, very important question. 4 marks, very important question. So they are the lymph. Lymph is a colorless fluid.